Hi, in this video, we're going to be talking about how do you know whether you are currently training at the right level of activity when you have already been diagnosed with an Achilles tendinopathy or tendonitis or tendinosis. We're going to go through different things, how to look at what symptoms you've got and how you can monitor those, how to look at what functional level you're at, and how to see whether that's at the right pitch, currently with the right stage of injury. And then we're going to talk about common training errors that you may notice have crept into your routines or your patterns over the last few weeks, months, or years, and how you can maybe change those to help whilst alongside this rehabilitating your Achilles tendon and your calf muscles to get stronger so then you can do more and more activity. I'm Ali. I'm one of the physios from treatmyachilles.com. We're an online virtual physiotherapy platform helping treat and assess any type of Achilles injuries. If you would like to find out a little bit more about what we do, please have a look at the link below. And there's the links in that help you book an appointment. So we're going to be talking about what is the current right amount of activity that you can do with your Achilles symptoms and problem that you've currently got, based on the fact that you've already had a diagnosis of an Achilles tendinopathy. So, if you're not sure if you've got an Achilles tendinopathy or not, now's the time to speak to a practitioner. And we've also got some other resources that we've talked about what is an Achilles tendinopathy and what are the typical signs and symptoms that you might find. And you can find that information below. Now, quite often, an Achilles tendinopathy is a grumbly condition that's been going on for a little while. And we start off with a few minor symptoms here and there that still mean we can do the activities that we like, or it might mean that we have to modify them ever so slightly, but we can tick away doing them. Sometimes the pain is quite acute and it stops us in our tracks and we can't do them anymore. At that point, most people stop their activity and calm it down and reach out to get some help. Other people, it doesn't happen so suddenly like that. It becomes more of a gradual, grumbly onset. So if you were to look over the last number of months or weeks, you would notice a gradual decline in what you can manage. So we're talking about, well, what can we do? How do we know whether we're at the right level? So we're going to break it down into, firstly, symptoms. So, symptoms with an Achilles that are typical would be a type of pain where you might not feel it when you are moving around, but you might feel it after rest. So, you can get a little bit of pain when you start an activity, but typically we warm up into that activity and it feels quite comfortable. We could complete that whole activity with minimal amount of pain, or sometimes it might come back nearer the end telling us that we've pushed our luck a little bit. This is a quite common thing that I get told to by patients, is that, oh, it's not the running or it's not the tennis that I do that's a problem because I don't have any pain when I do that. So I can keep doing that. It's more what happens after I've sat down for a while and then I get up and start moving and I feel like I'm walking like an older person. Or it's first thing the next morning when it feels quite stiff and like I can't really move my foot so much, or I get more pain the next day when I try and walk upstairs or downstairs or go up inclines or declines. These are the sorts of symptoms we're looking at trying to settle. So the idea is the right amount of activity means that your symptoms are such a low level that you could complete the rest of your day without having to modify it. And you could still do your rehabilitation exercises, which tend to be more strength based. So, all of our information on different types of strength exercises can be found below, and these are individual to every single patient. So, some people might be on holding and not moving, some people might be doing exercises on two legs, one leg, with weight, in gyms with gym equipment. It's a complete varied picture. So if you don't know what the right rehab exercises are for you, again, please reach out to a practitioner and get that assessment for you. So they were talking about symptoms being at such a low level that you're able to do those exercises. There isn't a, oh, because I did um, a run yesterday, I can't do my exercises today because it's too sore, or I could do them, but I can't push the weights up higher or do more repetitions of them. because it's been too sore. What we're trying to do with an Achilles rehab is gradually get that Achilles to be able to cope with more activity by increasing the calf strength. So, to increase calf strength, first of all, we need to calm things down, and then we need to build up the amount of activity you can do at the same time, building up the amount of strength of calf and Achilles, so the Achilles becomes more robust for that activity. So if you're not able to build up and progress those strength exercises, you're just on a maintenance and they've stayed the same for a number of weeks or months, you are not at the right level. That level of activity needs to be lower. When we're looking at pain, we can look at it from a score out of 10. That's quite a common type of way of looking into pain, and it can be put into like a traffic lights. So if you're 1, 2 or 3 out of 10, it's a green traffic light. The middle section's more amber, and if you're at the higher top ends, so your 7, 8, 9, 10s, you're in the red zone. So that's a really common thing that's used within medical practitioners, whether that's physios, doctors or other healthcare practitioners. And we're looking at trying to keep you in that green zone. If you start going into the amber, the yellow middle zone, then that's a warning sign that you've probably done too much. I quite like calling it my niggle rule. So it's only a small amount of niggle that you feel. So for me, that's really a 1 or 2 out of 10 at the absolute most. So enough that you could have done that activity. You can walk away from it without limping. You can continue your next 24 hours worth of plans with no modification. And at rest, or when you get up from rest, it's not taking your mind away from what you're doing. You're not having to concentrate on your Achilles or pain. So it's about editing the amount of sport or activity or time on your feet to help reduce everything down to that 0 to 2 out of 10. So things that you might not consider is it might not just be that sporting activity, it might be everything else you've done that day. So it could be you've gone and done a gym class where you're jumping about and doing various different things, then you've gone and gardened, and then you've had to walk the dog, and the following day you're now at work and you're on your feet moving back and forth. They are all load on that Achilles. So it might be that they're all not bad things, but how do you start to spread that out? So if I'm doing a high load gym class day, I don't do a longer dog walk. I go to a dog park and throw the ball, for example. If I've got a big day at work the next day where I'm going to be on my feet, could I change the day before and the day after to make them more lower impact or low step count days? Another nice comparison point when we're looking at symptoms is to compare it to the week before. So if we're sitting there on a Wednesday thinking, oh, how's it been over the last 7 days compared to this 7 days? Actually, I'm on a slippery slope where I'm not able to do as much and my symptoms are increasing. Then you're on a bit of a sign that you're doing too much activity at the moment. If everything's on a bit of an even keel and you're able to cope with that 0 to 2 out of 10 pain or less than that, brilliant, you're on the right amount of activity. Or equally, if your pain was really awful last week and it's starting to improve and you can do a bit more, it shows you're on the right track of editing that activity and changing it. So comparing 1 week to the next is really, really useful. Comparing that 24-hour pattern after a particular activity. So I've always done this, played tennis on a Tuesday. How do I feel for the next 24 hours compared to a Thursday where I might be going to the gym and lifting weights? How do I feel for the next 24 hours? So you can then see, have we got a cause and effect with particular activities or busy days? And it might be that you need to look back if you've got activity watches or something that measures your step counts. Was it a higher day that meant that my next day was more problematic? Or the opposite, was I more sedentary and I felt stiffer when I was getting up and moving that day? So I had more symptoms on a sedentary day, is probably telling you what you've done for the day or two before has increased that stiffness feeling or pain. So it's a comparison of those two things. The final thing with symptoms to consider is how long it's taken you to recover after doing something that might have aggravated it. So typically when we first start off, like we said, a bit grumbly, a bit niggly, and you can ignore it, maybe get over your activity, live with that background pain, carry on like normal. But if you're noticing that the amount of time it takes you to recover from that flare up of symptoms after doing something is gradually getting more and more. So I go for a run, it takes me 3 days to calm down. Now it's calmed down, brilliant, I can go for a run again. And then the next time it's now taking 4 days, or it's now 4 out of 10 pain instead of 2 out of 10 pain for 2 or 3 days. That recovery time, again, on that slippery slope, indication that things are too much. So we need to edit and reduce. This doesn't mean stopping. This is all about relative rest. And again, we've got more information on that. But we're looking at how can you edit? So instead of doing sprints or interval trainings or hill reps, can I just continue running on the flat? Instead of doing all of my runs in a week, can I cross train for some of them on a bike or in a pool or on a cross trainer? In a gym class, can I do the lower impact versions instead of the higher impact version, or a mixture? I'll do the high impact for this interval, then my rest period, then a lower impact, then my rest period, then my higher impact again. What is it with you that you can edit, and what is non-negotiable? You can't just stop work. You might have to keep your step count higher. So then what is something you can manipulate? Can you perch instead of stand more at work? Can you change your footwear? Can you be taking things that you might be able to delegate to different people, for example? So we talked about symptoms, but the other thing that sort of isn't really noticed as easily until it's got to a certain level is a decrease in function. So we might be happily bumbling around with a little grumbly Achilles. We've edited our activity, our pain's gone away, but we really just can't get back into that last 20%, that last push. So we can't do the higher level impact activity in a class. We can't do the full out sprints. We can't do the really competitive tennis match. We're having to dumb things down a little bit. Or we're trying to have to now wear shoes all the way around the house instead of bare feet. In the garden, you're saying, I won't do the digging, I'll just do the weeding and the deadheading. Things where you're having to, over time, without you realizing, edit down, and that function is in that slippery slope of decreasing. I'm doing less and less and less. And again, that is a sign that you're probably doing the wrong amount of activity for your calf and Achilles complex at the moment. That Achilles isn't coping with doing that extra amount. You certainly can get back to doing that. You certainly will be able to do it, but we need to give those strengthening exercises and time to build up that strength. And if applicable, but depending on the sport you're doing, maybe look at more jumping and bouncing activities too, and rehabilitate that. But it's also a sign that what you're currently doing is heading in one direction. So you need to have a look at your strength exercises and see how can I be progressing those. And again, speaking to a practitioner is really important over that period of time. So typical training errors that we would be looking at, or patterns of behaviour that people get into, myself included, when we have injuries. We go through what's normally called a boom and bust pattern, and we have some images for that. So the booming is where you feel great, symptoms are pretty brilliant, or they're not there, or they're minimal, and you can do everything that you want to do. And you suddenly go, yes, brilliant, I'm back on normal life. I'll do. Ow, now it really hurts. I've flared it up. I've got to stop. And then I stop. Everything calms down. All my symptoms calm down. I feel great again. Brilliant. Maybe it's fixed this time. Let's have a go. And we go back through that again. And that's a boom and a bust. Now, with a tendinopathy, unfortunately, rest doesn't fix it. It can help with symptom management, absolutely, and it can make things more calmer. Think of it like a pressing on a bruise analogy. I'm doing some activity, I'm pressing on a bruise, it gets to the point where that bruise is really now quite sensitive, pressed on it enough, ouch, it hurts, I stop pressing on that bruise starts to go away, I feel comfortable, I can get back to activity again. So actually what we need for an Achilles tendinopathy is strengthening and making that Achilles more robust by strengthening the calf. So that is what's going to take the time to help even out that boom and bust sign. So what you are trying to do is find the level of activity that keeps you on that middle road whilst you're doing your strength activities. Then that middle road gets bigger. You do more strength activity, then you can do more again. Then you might bring in jumping, bouncing, or jogging, and so on. And then you can do more again, and you're starting to build up. So a good guide is trying to keep everything at that 0 to 2 out of 10, trying to look at that 24-hour pattern, trying to compare week to week, and editing out the activity that tends to flare you up the most for 24 hours. So that's your boom and bust cycle. Other things are going hard too soon. So I've started a new activity. I've had a go. I loved it. So the new thing around me is paddle courts. There are loads of paddle courts springing up. Everybody's going and having a great time and having a good go. And suddenly they've now gone from giving it a try to booking in 4 times a week. And that might be absolutely great for the first few weeks. But after a while, we start to be using things that we haven't used for a while. We've suddenly gone from this amount of activity for those parts of our body to this amount. And all of a sudden, aches and pains and injuries are starting to come about. So it's that slow and steady ramp up that tendons like better than an all or nothing, which unfortunately is not human nature. So if you are thinking, I tend to start something and then injuries flare and I have to stop, like that boom and a bust, it might be that you're trying to jump in too quickly. And if you started at a lower level and then tested it, so instead of playing singles, you play doubles. Instead of playing for 90 minutes, you play for 45 minutes. Instead of going for a run with a paced group in my running club, can I start to jog with a slower paced group or on my own or with a friend that's at a different pace to what I'm used to? How can we start to change things so we keep everything on that even keel? And when we're starting to ramp up, we now try slightly more, and we might try slightly more for a longer period of time. So instead of that 45 minutes, we now try 60 minutes. Instead of that slower pace, we might do a slower pace, a little bit at our normal pace, and then a slower pace again. How can we start to progress that and build that up over time in little incremental steps? That's where jog run programs in the UK, we have one called Couch to 5K, are quite good because they are incrementally building you up, and you also can go slower or faster than that program needs, depending on how you are. And again, that's where a practitioner can give you a bit more nuanced advice. Rest days are something that are really, really important. They're important for us in general, but when we come to look at what's called overuse injuries, which tendinopathy is part of, we're talking about trying to help our body adapt to stimulus that from an activity that we have been doing, to get stronger to allow us to do that again. So what I mean by that is a tendon is made up of collagen. Those collagen are in loads of bundles of fibers, and those bundles of fibers create one big tendon. That collagen has a collagen cycle, and that's normal and happens everywhere in our body, all of our lives. And what's happening is our body is replenishing that collagen fibers and removing waste products, and off we go. When we do activity, we have a strength adaptation or an adaptation response to that activity. So when we do it, our body responds. It starts to create micro damage within the tissues, i.e., it's starting to say, oh, you've pushed my boundaries a bit. And then it adapts, makes that tissue stronger. That tissue can now cope better, and we go again. So that's how we get fitter, how we get stronger, how we can manage to do things. But that cycle takes a period of time. And if we're doing too much activity without allowing that cycle to complete, so if we're overlapping one cycle across the other, that's when our tissues go, can't cope anymore. I'm going to become a cycle of disrepair. So the repair, it's now not repairing. So it's starting to say, I'm getting a bit injured or aggravated or a problem. Now, That's not to say that what we've done there is permanent damage. What we're saying there is that the body can't keep up with the demand that you're asking it to do. So having at least one, maybe two rest days a week is a really good time to look at, can I calm this down and and make sure my body's building up that resilience to it. So a rest day after your most intensive activity day or your highest time on feet day is an excellent one for an Achilles tendinopathy. Now, a rest doesn't mean you've got to sit with your feet up and do nothing at all. It just might mean that you haven't got as big a time on feet that day, or you're not doing anything to stress that calf and Achilles complex. So, not doing loads of strength activities or anything that involves a lot of moving about where you might be raising up onto your tiptoes and coming back down again. So, rest days are really important. You can have one good rest day and then you might carve out a cheat rest day in the week. And that cheat rest day might be where you do an activity in the morning and then you have the rest of the day not really doing anything, the next day not really doing anything, and then do an activity in the evening. So you've had a fake 24 hours, but yet you've managed to still fit things in. Again, that wouldn't be ideal if that was the only thing you were doing, but adding in a second one, maybe there's a clever way you can move your diary around to look at that. Another good thought process to see if you're at the right level of activity is to look at the number of minutes that you are doing activity in a week, or it might be step count again, or it might be mileage. It depends on what activities and sports you're doing, and seeing how much of that is high intensity activity. So 80% of that activity should be at a very light to moderate level. So a lower, medium intense activity, and 20% at that full on, I'm really going for it and working hard activity. If you have so much in your diary, that means you've skewed over that 20%. Like I said, number of minutes working is an easy way of looking at this. Then again, you may be doing something where you're doing too much exertion and trying to change that. How do I modify that to get that 80-20 split is a good way of looking at it. How do I know whether I'm in the easy to moderate level to a higher level? Well, fancy devices might be able to tell you, looking at heart rate and telling you what your heart rate is and different parameters, which again tend to be told on things like this or other programs that you can look at in software. You also can use what's called the rate of perceived excursion, and that's just telling you how you're feeling when you're moving. So your 80% should be in a I can talk, I can hold a conversation, I can start to feel like I'm doing some exercise, but it feels pretty okay. If I'm exercising with somebody, I can have comments with them whilst I'm doing that. Your moderate to vigorous level is the I'm kind of just can still talk, but I'm catching my breath at the same time while I'm doing that. And the very hard activity, the 20% that we're talking about, is more I'm in discomfort, I'm short of breath. You're lucky if you're going to get a word out of me in a sentence, or I'm not able to do that. So looking at that, and we've got a nice infographic that will show you that information in a bit more detail. So in summary, can you notice with yourself any boom and bust patterns? How can you even out that curve? Can you have a look at how hard you're working? Can we go for an 80-20 split? And can we start to see whether we've got rest days for the calf and the Achilles complex or legs in your week? Maybe one, preferably two if possible. So now let's say we've got an activity planned. We've got something coming up. It's a holiday we've been looking for, or an activity weekend, or an event we've been looking forward to that we've paid to go and join in for that's active. Those sorts of things we need to have a think, how can we plan for? So we've given some bits of tips already. We're talking about not having a sudden load in activity. So over the weeks to months beforehand, can we be focusing on our strength and rehab? Discuss this with the practitioner that you're seeing that can give you a program and tell you how realistic that goal is in that time scale. Can you be practicing for that goal? So what is it? Is it multiple exercise classes in a weekend? Is it walking more mileage than you would normally do? Is it a tournament where you're playing multiple games? How can you start to increase your activity over the next weeks or months beforehand so that it's not suddenly gone from here to here? Equally, we'd then be looking at rest periods. So those rest periods being, can we have our high intensity day, then our rest day like we spoke about before? But equally for that few days before, they talk about it with tapering when you're looking at training for marathons or similar long distance events. But can we for that week before have a more restful week for our lower limb in this instance? You might also need to find that you have a lighter load week when you return. And if you are doing your rehab exercises, those rehab exercises when you return are not at your maximum level. They might be 20–30% less, seeing how your symptoms are, or you might need a few days rest completely before then going back to do those again, and then again ramping that activity level back up to your normal level that you're doing. So your plan would be a couple of 3 months before. Ask yourself honestly, how are my rehab exercises going? Am I progressing them, or am I in a holding pattern? If I'm in a holding pattern or I'm not progressing and my activity level coming up is much higher, how do I progress those over this next 2 to 3 months? Again, that's where a nuanced approach speaking to a practitioner would be important at this time. How do I then look at, I'm trying to get to here and I'm here currently, how over those few months do I manage to put in that activity so I'm ramping it up? And how do I put in at least 2 rest days a week? With that, there's some evidence base in running research and also in strength and conditioning research about loading more for a few weeks and then having a deloading week. So you might be doing increase, 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 and around about week 4, decreased week. So you're still doing something, but you're not doing as much. So instead of 3 runs, you might be doing 2. Instead of lifting heavier weights and pushing it up, you're not really doing anything at all. You're doing more mobility work that week. It's about ramping up and giving yourself the time that you need. So again, looking in your diary, what suits you better? 3 weeks up, 1 week down, 5 weeks up, 1 week down. How does that work with you? And if I am doing that, how am I incrementally changing things? Again, in research for endurance sports, they're talking about a 10% rule. So the amount of activity, so again, doesn't have to be mileage or step counts. We're sort of transferring that over, although there isn't the evidence for that. How do I move this amount of activity into the next level? Well, again, about 10% is more. So it might be that you're looking at the volume. How many minutes exercising am I doing in total in this week? Can I increase that by 10% next week? Or you might be looking at speed. How many minutes have I been working in speed intervals? Can I increase that number next time? Or can I keep it the same and just ramp up that speed by a little marker? Can I be looking at increasing the competitive edge of my sports so I keep 2 at the similar level that I'm doing and put 1 up, for example, to a higher level or a higher league perspective, depending on who you can play against and what you can do if you're in a tennis club, for example? How can you start to plan ahead and think about those changes? So a 10% rule is quite nice. And remember, that's on a weekly sessions added together. That's not on daily sessions. 3 weeks or more up and 1 week down. Having 1 to 2 rest days, really important. And then looking at that 80–20 split that we spoke about. So in summary, if you're living with current levels of pain or symptoms, you haven't had it diagnosed, please go and see a practitioner. If you have had a diagnosis of Achilles tendinopathy, it may be worth discussing with that practitioner if you haven't already some of the things we've brought up. But it's how can I progress my strengthening exercises over time to reach the goals that I want to do, alongside how do I edit that activity so I can compare my symptoms from 1 week to the next and be happy that they're staying the same, or ideally they're improving alongside my function and my activity levels. If that is happening, you are currently at the right level of activity, as long as your symptoms that you're in are in that low load 0 to 2 kind of niggle only level. Thank you very much.